everyone. Welcome to episode 5 of Art Brunch Archives. I'm the host of Art Brunch, Rick Bowling. Much of the show works well as audio only, but there are times when we're referencing images on the screen. We host these archives wherever you get your podcasts, as well as YouTube. In the podcast description, I'll share the link to the YouTube video and vice versa. Lastly, before we learn about Drew, please take a moment to like and subscribe. If you want to watch these talks live with our community, I've included the links to our Twitch in the description as well. Drew Nikonowicz earned a BFA degree from the University of Missouri-Columbia in 2016. His work employs analog photographic processes as well as computer simulations to deal with exploration and experience in contemporary culture. He's exhibited both nationally and internationally. In 2015, he received the Aperture Portfolio Prize and the Lenscratch Student Prize. In 2017, Nikkinovich completed a one-year residency at Fabrica Research Centre. His first photo book, This World and Others Like It, was co-published by Yoffy Press and FW Books in 2019. It was awarded a Jurors Special Mention at the 2019 Paris Photo Aperture Foundation Photobook Awards. He now lives in the United States in St. Louis. He works in St. Louis as an artist and is the photography technician at the Sam Fox School of Design and Visual Arts at Washington University. Drew found us on Twitch and said he was interested in being a guest on Art Brunch. When we talked, we hit it off right away. Drew is a prolific maker, artist, and fellow Twitch streamer. Check out in the description all the ways that you can connect with Drew. On a technical note, some of this video has poor syncing between audio and video. Actually, all of it is poorly synced. That's an issue that we've solved after episode 7. We start this episode right after I asked Drew about his memories of his creativity as a child. Please look to the points of interest in the timeline in the description to aid your navigation and enjoy the show.
Well, when you sort of mentioned this the other day and you talked about like what's the first thing you remember drawing? Uh,
Yeah.
that like scared me because the first thing I can remember drawing is guns.
Yeah.
And I remember getting in trouble. They were like, "You can't draw guns." I was like, "I'm like 6, y'all." Like I like the idea of something that has a lot of accessories. I don't know that it's necessarily that it needs to be a gun, but I think the thing that I think more about when like this kind of question comes up is
Uh-huh.
being like a like early tens. I don't remember the age. I'm really bad with dates and numbers in this capacity, but I had my dad's point and shoot camera,
Mm-hmm.
and I like took some just like random pictures. And there's one in particular that I didn't take, but he took of me standing on top of a sand dune somewhere in I want to say Michigan.
Okay.
And I'm like standing on top of this branch or whatever, and my head is like perfectly in the blue sky that's behind me.
Mm.
And I took it into Microsoft Paint and I cut my head off and I moved it over so it looked like I was headless and my head was floating like 3 feet to the right.
Yeah.
And I was like so fired up by that. I was like, this is so cool. And I was like immediately embraced by the just like palatial limitations of Microsoft Paint.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, I need something more. And like for the longest time, there wasn't anything more.
Mm.
Just because I guess I didn't know that. I mean, I was a kid. I didn't know Photoshop existed.
Right. It was a super inaccessible product, even if you did
Yeah. And
at that point.
yeah. And like my computer probably wouldn't have been able to handle it anyways.
Mm.
But I remember that and like that very clearly leading to me begging my mom for my first camera.
Uh-huh.
Um, but yeah, I remember like these I did a couple of them, but it feels like I did so many. But I think it's just because like when you first start making things in a way that's exciting to you, like it feels like you're doing so much more
Hmm.
before you get
Mm-hmm.
into like formalized art school. And it's like, by the way, you're doing like 1/10 of what you ought to be doing.
Yeah, not even the bare minimum.
Yeah, it's like, hey, it's really cool that you did that one, but like, can you make 20 more next week
Right.
before we hang for crit on Friday? It's like, oh, okay, yeah, I think I can do that.
Yeah, so one of the things that's interesting is up until this point for the show, we've had like painters and people who in their so I think that there's something special about you being very interested in photography that kind of like flips that question on the head. Like maybe you got into photography because you couldn't draw guns, right? Like like maybe that was a good transition for you at an early age. But did you have a drawing practice? Have you, and I don't know these things about you, have you had other kinds of like what are the other artistic practices that you've had throughout your life aside from photography, or has that always kind of been the top hierarchy in your work?
Well, I think until I found photography, I like didn't know what I wanted to do. And that sounds like I lived my whole life and then I picked up a camera. It was like I was still a kid. But
Mm,
um before like getting that first little point and shoot camera that my mom got me, um I don't know that I even really thought about art making. I don't think I really
hmm.
thought about drawing or paint. Like I'm sure my mom, in fact, I know my mom has like that stuff that every parent has that you're just like, please throw this away.
Yeah.
No one needs to see this. Um, but
Yeah,
like,
there's still a drawing of a fish on a magnet that I made that's floating around ephemerally in my family members. I must have been like 6 or something,
that's so good.
which is actually probably pretty cool. Pretty cool now. What was that process like to? Okay, so you wanted the point and shoot camera,
Hmm.
and then what was that process like for you to, if you remember, um, to ask to like ask for that camera, or do you remember the excitement around that purchase?
I like it was one of those things where I was at that age where you're like trying a lot of different things and your parents are kind of like, look, you need to just pick something because we can't keep doing this.
Hmm.
And so like I was doing like drum lessons for a while before this, and um that kind of died because the guy that was teaching me quit or like left the state. I don't actually know what
Oh,
happened.
okay.
But he stopped being my drum teacher, and I got this other guy, and I just like didn't vibe with him at all. And so I kind of just went to my mom and I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. And I think my mom was like, okay, because like she probably just was like, if he doesn't want to do it, I'm not gonna spend the money. Like that's not really like a thing that I can just go around throwing money at. But
Yeah.
um yeah, I had to do some convincing because I was like,
Hmm.
I was at the whims and wills of my interests as they came and went because I was a kid. And she was like, if we do that, like you need to like be serious about this. Like, I really don't want to get this for you and then just like turn around and see that you're just like never using it.
Mm,
And somehow I convinced them, and we went to like Schiller's here in St. Louis, and
nice.
I was just like, I didn't know anything. I was like, I don't know, I want a camera. And my mom was just like, here's one, like, middle of the road, nothing too fancy, but nothing too cheap, just basic point and shoot camera. And I ran away with it. Like,
Wow.
that was, so my birthday's in May. I got that for
Hmm.
Christmas. And by the time my birthday came around, like as a young kid, this felt like a big number. I had made like a couple thousand photographs on that
Mm,
little point and shoot camera. And so I was like, I got to this point where I'd learned a lot. I had taught myself all this stuff and I'd done all these things. And I was just like, I need something more. Like I had this energy. And so like I somehow managed to convince them to get me like a DSLR for my
okay.
birthday 5 months later.
Oh wow, that's a really quick turnaround
It
time.
was like I don't know. I mean, it was one of those things where it felt right in every way, and I just like absolutely felt completely in love with it, just like super enamored by the prospect of like image making.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I think it was those little things leading up to it, like photoshopping or Microsoft painting my head off of my body. Like I sort of it was almost like I had sort of fallen into this universe of possibilities, and I saw the potential to explore it like ad nauseum, and I was like, I
Mm-hmm.
need to do this. And
Mm.
I do think to some extent I kind of have an obsessive personality, and so like
Mm-hmm.
I latch on really hard to certain things, and like letting that go is very difficult for me. And so I think that my mom just sort of thought, okay, I mean, you're making a lot of pictures, you're clearly doing a lot, and like I was posting them to this website that doesn't exist anymore, and so she got to look at what I was doing, and
Yeah.
she was like, this is extracurricular and you care. I
Yeah.
should foster this.
That's great. Yeah, Chris Griffin 522, welcome to the stream. Hello, welcome. Um and yeah, so I can imagine, and I don't have children of my own. You don't have children of your own.
No.
Yeah. I imagine that it is like a really difficult dance of like wanting to support the your child, but also like recognizing their whimsical nature.
Yeah.
But then I also think about like like her, the decision making process of actually getting you that first one and then seeing it blossom into this practice in such a short amount of time was probably like really really encouraging experience, for her to see as well.
Yeah, I think she especially found it really exciting and was like happy for me to have found something, because like this is also right around the time that um like my parents were like starting to get divorced, and there was, like all of
Mm,
that like tumultuousness happening. And so for
mm-hmm,
me to like, and that's probably part of why I latched onto it so hard, is because it was like this thing that I could control.
mm,
And so like all of that wrapped in together, it was for her, I imagine, to some capacity, just kind of like, this is like an outlet for him, and honestly,
mm.
he probably needs that right now.
Yeah. How old were you when this was going on generally?
Oh
I
god.
forget.
It was high school. I got my DSLR early high school, like
Okay.
freshman year
So
probably.
that's like 14 maybe.
Yeah, something like that. I
Okay,
was
cool.
like
Yeah.
13, 14. Yeah, that sounds right.
Those are the years of like true turmoil, I think.
Yeah.
Like the beginning of like actually understanding what turmoil is. And life is kind of full of turmoil.
Mm-hmm.
Um but I don't think that I think that parents do, sometimes a good job at keeping the child away from turmoil. And then also, I think that the gravity of turmoil doesn't really settle into like the physical self, aside from like traumatic experiences. But I think that for a lot of people, this like sense of dread or the sense of turmoil begins in a myriad of ways, kind of in that 12, 13, 14 range. Uh,
Yeah, I think so
yeah.
too. I think it's like, everything's changing in every way.
Hmm.
And it's just like, what do you do with all this like energy and all these things and these changes? And I think that's also probably part of why like that's around the age that people start sort of being like, my parents suck.
Yeah, definitely. Um, yeah. So, what were some of the like subject matters that you began taking photographs of in those formative spaces?
Oof. I mean, so I was doing a lot of like, at the time I was really excited by things like light painting and long
Oh yeah.
exposures, and um I just thought they were so sick, and I thought I was so cool that I could do it. And like looking back on it, you're kind of like, oh, that's cute, kind of cringy, kind of awkward, but also like I fully respect and in some ways really try to cultivate that like excitement to just try things even
Hmm.
now. But it was a lot of that kind of stuff. I made a lot of like self portraits because basically I also saw myself as this like edgy kid, which I really wasn't, quite frankly. Um, and so I would like go out at night after like my mom went to sleep, and I'd go over to like the school that was near my house, and I'd like make long exposures on the playground and stuff. And
Mm.
like I there are some pictures that I still look at that I'm like, these are cool. They're well executed, and I'm like, I'm impressed that a teenager made this. But
Yeah.
my partner likes to remind me of the titles of all of them because, like I said, I was posting them to this website that doesn't exist anymore.
It's like a photo bucket kind of vibe.
It was called JPG Mag, and it it like used to be a magazine, and then it wasn't, and then it was just a compendium for people making photographs, and then like I recently went and looked, and it's just gone because like my pictures were still up there for the longest
Yeah.
time, and like we would just randomly go and look at them, and all I would think is just like, God, these titles are so cringy. And so like what would happen is like there's this one image of me on like one of those like carousel things that you sit on and like a bunch of people get on and spin it.
Oh yeah.
And
Uh-huh.
I made this picture of me on it, and the camera's on the other side, and so like the background is just like bands of light, and it's like, kind of teenager, kind of high school art, but it's also like kind of rad. I couldn't
Mm.
tell you the title of that photo, but if my partner was here, she'd be like, "It was this," and I would regret bringing it up.
It's like a diary, like some of these early technological social medias or expressions, I think occupy a similar space to what a diary would be,
Yeah,
like a journaling practice. um, and I think one of the reasons I don't have a strong journaling practice is because I do not ever want to be confronted any more clearly with the cringe of my current life. Because it just keeps going. It's kind of infinite, infinite cringe. Um,
yes and
but that's
no.
yeah.
I don't
You
know.
think you're out of your cringe stage?
No, I mean, no, don't get me wrong. Like, I'm sure in 10 years, I'll think about some things I did now and be like, what were you thinking, you fool?
Mm, right.
But I
But maybe
also,
what you
like,
were saying,
I don't
yeah,
know. I
is
kind
that it's
of,
important.
yeah, I think, like, well, two things. I think, I think it's useful to have that to think back and look back at. I mean,
Yeah. Hmm.
obviously, if it's sort of to a fault, then don't do it. But, like, I think about it more in terms of like an art practice,
Hmm.
like kind of like you're getting at, like maybe you don't journal. And actually, what I thought you were going to say is this. I thought you were going to say, like, maybe you don't journal because you're like making work instead.
Mm, hmm.
And I kind of think that way, at least as like a photographer. I can look at pictures I made 4 years ago, and I can sort of be like, okay, okay. And like, you see some of the stuff you do, and you look back and you're like, yeah, that was never going to pan out.
Mm.
um, which in some ways is sort of the equivalent of being like, wow, this is kind of cringy.
I really liked long exposure as well at a similar age, and I think we were born the same year, so it may have been something trendy taking place at that time, or uh, something that was happening because of the internet. I also found myself really interested in it, but what I think is particularly relevant to our conversation is you spoke about kind of those early explorations with uh, digital manipulations of photographs,
Yeah.
and then when I ask you the subject matter of the photography from nearly the beginning of your experience, you were manipulating these photographs using like light techniques, like the light painting technique is like a form of manipulating the image because it's not there. Long exposure starts to manipulate the image from the place that it's taken, which in some senses seems obvious because those are the things that you're interested in your work. but it's also a nice connection between this early photo manipulation and then manipulating the hardware of the camera using long exposure and light, and then to kind of where your work is exploring in some facets of your work now, continuing that manipulation process.
Yeah, totally. I feel like what ultimately, once you find the words to kind of use for these kinds of things, it's kind of easy to draw that line where you sort of go, okay, you were manipulating images, and then it was sort of an I think the way I would describe it is like an exploration of the possibilities of like what can be done with a camera and time.
Mm.
To where like now, at least like with This World and Others Like It, my previous project, there's a lot of different things going on. There's not necessarily like what I would consider genuine image manipulation, where I'm like compositing photographs and like taking things from over here and putting them over there and stuff like that. But there
Mm-hmm.
is still this amount of like what's possible, like what can be done, like where can I point my camera, and what kind of transformative process can the image go through by making an image a certain way, or like sort of taking advantage of a certain perspective or technique, or and just like personally as kind of a both an artistic endeavor but also as like a personal endeavor with photography, kind of questioning where I can push those boundaries when I
Mm-hmm.
make new images and I make more images.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. And that goes really deep into all of the methods of interacting with the camera, even to the extent, I think one of the projects that you created or made or participated in was actually making physical cameras
Yeah.
as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of it's that's sort of like its own thing, but it's also like super related. Like
Mm-hmm.
I started, so basically like to give the full kind of progression here, I was in college getting my BFA in photo,
Mm-hmm.
and I totally just like jacked up the system. I went to Mizzou with full intention of being a photojournalist. I was like,
Uh-huh.
I want to work for Nat Geo, blah, blah, blah. Like I had this very specific vision of what is possible as an image maker professionally.
Mm-hmm.
And, my family was sort of like engaging with that and sort of promoting and fostering that part of it, because they were like, we want you to be successful and happy. Like we don't know that how you do that with a camera.
Yeah.
Um, which is like I think a pretty standard conversation that happens with any artist in any media. Like your parents are kind of like, "What are you gonna do with this? How's this gonna
Yeah.
play out?" And so my vision was like, "Oh, photojournalism," and I had
Mm.
been on like the high school newspaper at the same times that I was making these like photographs in high school and stuff. And so when I got to college, I took like a photo class, like an art photo class, and I just like threw everything away. Like it just flipped everything I thought I understood about like what's possible as in photography, both professionally, artistically, as an industry, and
Mm.
everything. And it was just like throw all that away because you have no idea what you're talking about. And very
Mm-hmm.
quickly, I was like, I don't want to be a photojournalist. Like it's very clear to me that I want to be an artist.
Yeah.
And so because I transitioned from photojournalism into the fine art track, I kind of like skipped a bunch of the foundations courses, because
Mm.
rather than going into like art school with the intention of being an artist and them saying, okay, here are the foundation courses you need to take: 2D design, 3D design, beginning painting, like, the usual stuff that you take at like a liberal arts college experience. Um, Instead, it was like, okay, I took beginning photography. Now I'm ready to take intermediate photo, and also I'm changing my major. And like because of the way that all happened, I also stopped going to my advisor. I just started making my own schedules
Mm.
because around this time I went to them at one point and I was like, I'm thinking about double majoring, and they were like, in art and photojournalism, and I was like, yeah. And they were like, well, it's going to be hard, but if you do like 20 hours a semester, you could do it in 4.5 years.
Wow.
And like I started like mocking that up, and it very quickly occurred to me that that is not reasonable or realistic.
Mm-hmm.
And like being, I was still kind of like a punk at this point. I was like, well, these people are stupid. Like they just want me to take as many classes as possible so that I owe them more money.
Mm.
And so I just stopped going to the advisor. And those several things basically led to 2.5 years of college where I took whatever classes I wanted, um, that like, met requirements that I had for my degree path, but I just
Uh-huh.
didn't take the classes I didn't want to take.
Mm.
So we arrive at me being invited to take like a new course that one of my professors was like, fostering. It was going to be a new part of the program, and he was just like, doing a dry run
Mm-hmm.
with a hand-picked selection of artists and photographers that he thought would be like a cool group to put into this course.
Okay.
And it was a 4x5 photography course. So I've been, at this point, I've already been shooting with large format cameras for a while. And at the same time that I'm taking this class, I'm catching up with all of these classes that like I didn't take that I should have been. And so I'm in this large format photography course for like advanced photography level, like 4 or 5,000 level course. And I'm also in 3D design.
Okay.
And so I'm like, I'm making these like, foundations level assignments, but I'm like running away with them because my mind
Oh
is
yeah.
like, super fresh with all of the newness of like really thinking more conceptually and more seriously about like individual pieces and things.
Mm-hmm.
And I get to this assignment where we have to make something out of cardboard, and it has to be an extension of yourself. And
Okay.
people are making things like truck door, the Burninator costumes that they can wear, and like wings, and like the kinds of things that when you immediately think of an extension of oneself, you think, oh, that could be an extension of my body or whatever.
Yeah.
And I like somehow managed to make my way around to like this really lame, but also an argument that I was really committed to making, which was like,
Mm-hmm.
well, a camera is the extension of my arm. Like, and there's probably like 300 famous photographers who have said some like really lame version of that. But I was like committed. I was like, no, professor, this is what I want to do, and I will, whatever criteria you give me, I'll meet it just so that you let me make this instead of like wings or something. Because
Mm-hmm.
kind of like, you kind of like alluded to, or at least we collectively did earlier, where like in some ways photography works for me because I'm just like, I could foster these talents, but I just like, I don't have a lot of inherent artistic ability like with the hand, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And so photography worked really well for me because it was more about organization and less about like tact with hand on
Okay.
paper. And so I didn't want to make something that had, curves. I wanted to make something that had edges.
I see. Yeah.
And I also like, I took a couple engineering classes in high school, and so like, there were all these different things about photography that excited me. It wasn't just
Mm-hmm.
making images. It was like the apparatus itself I found really fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
So my professor pushed back hard. She was like, this doesn't really fit the da 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 da. And we went back and forth for a while, and she goes, if you can make a cardboard 4x5 that works, then I'll let you do that for the assignment. And I was like,
Oh.
okay, bye. And I made a 4x5 out of cardboard that worked.
That's
Um,
wild.
it didn't work well,
Uh-huh.
but it worked, damn it. And I walked into the
Yeah.
critique with a print and a negative that I had made with the camera.
Uh-huh.
And it was like this like real quiet little middle finger to the teacher because she sort of pushed back on it every step of the way. She'd check in, she'd be like, how's it going? And I'd be like, well, I have this part done, but now I'm working on this part, and then I need to make the bellows and da 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 da. And like every step of the way she was just like, maybe do something else, da 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 da. And I was like, I'm committed. Like, do you not see the energy I have about
Yeah.
this?
Right.
So, and long story short, I get a B minus, and it's like, wow, okay. I mean, I made a functional camera out of recyclable material, but it's cool.
You must have really hurt her feelings.
What was so
You
weird,
did
I
something. You did something to, and that happens a lot in art school. That's something that's like common too. I think more common in creative classes than other classes. Like I have been in situations where I have like deeply profoundly hurt my professor's feelings in the middle of a critique or with a particular assignment that I chose to go through.
yeah,
And but yeah, I think that that's really interesting. That like first of all, what is the conceptual underpinning to deny, like a camera as being this object, yet to like to use the example that you shared. What's the conceptual underpinning to deny that while accepting like a wing, like this fictitious, fake, unreal allegory
yeah,
for an experience?
exactly. It's I just sort of like, look, I get it that it doesn't like perfectly fit the criteria of what you're envisioning, but like,
Mm-hmm.
part of the problem, in my humble opinion, is that I had been um, uninitiated or like indoctrinated.
Mm.
And this was something that like we talked about in photo classes at Mizzou. Like you go into art school with the vision of classes and assignments being this thing where you are given an assignment and you execute that assignment. When as you get further along into the like art trajectory, that structure slowly shifts to you are given space and time and you need to make decisions about what you're doing and why you're doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that part of the issue was that I had already been um, deinstitutionalized. That's the phrase that we, or the word that we would use. And I had already like totally given myself over to being given time and space and making my own decisions and reasons. And I think that her vision of the assignment was a lot more like limited in scope because it was meant to be like an introductory course.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that like at this point I had already proven myself to be a bit of a hassle because every assignment I would have these like crazy ideas and I damn it, I executed on them every single time. Like I
Mm-hmm.
didn't ever not turn an assignment in. I didn't ever skip class. I wasn't the like I'm better than this because I'm further along. It was more like
Right.
this is something I need to do. I'm going to do it in a way that makes me happy.
Yeah.
And I think that she just like really didn't like that. But I
Huh.
think deep down she knew that she effed up when she gave me that B minus because at the end of the semester she changed it to an A plus. And I was like,
Wow.
it's too late. You've hurt my feelings.
Yeah.
Because at this
That's a
point I also like
strange,
don't
like
care about the grades, you know?
strange kind of like shameful method of yeah. Wow. Well,
Yeah.
I think that those are the strong and powerful experiences that can take place inside of art education. And though strong and powerful for you as well as for the instructors kind of engaging and confronting their own styles and um, I think about education. Somebody's teaching for 5 years. The students that are coming in the fifth year are so much different than the students that are coming in the first year.
Yeah.
Not to mention like the individuality between each of them, but it's this like rolling system of trying to stay on top of that. Um,
Yeah, and like I feel like that's something that's kind of difficult to do, and like there's so much adaptation involved in that, and I think some people just don't do well with that, you
Yeah, you
know?
kind of get into a groove, especially in those early ones. I had a creative strategies class that I took during my second go at art school, which also didn't work. but um, but yeah, the it was I was so unhappy to be there in some ways because I spent a year in a foundations program at Kansas City Art Institute, and like we, we went through hell there.
Yeah.
Uh, so then we had this creative strategies class that I needed to take at Webster, and really came in kind of bummed to have to go through that experience just to like tick some box off.
Yeah.
Uh, but it was like one of the more pivotal times of exploration for me in just like returning to the fundamentals, like returning to the basics and being able to express these ideas through all of these like very simple fundamental conventions. Because I tend to complicate things, continue to complicate things. It was a really good reminder to simplify things. So those classes have a great role. I did want to move over to some of the work that you're making,
Yeah.
um, and share those. Those images that you sent me, you mentioned that they are uh, some of the newer works that you've been working on. Is this a part of a series that you're engaged in, or is this just some of the newer things that are taking place?
Um, I don't really know. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so for a long time, I thought I was working on a project that I'm calling this, I Know What I Saw.
Okay.
And I think really what that meant or means now is that that is a phrase that I'm like using as a prompt as I navigate image making.
Okay.
And so it's like I kind of just try to embrace sort of a yes philosophy, which is like if I have an idea to make a photo, I stop myself before I can talk myself out of the idea and I
Mm.
just go and make the image.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but for a long time, the idea of I Know What I Saw was sort of founded in this community that I'm really fascinated by of people who think that the Tasmanian tiger isn't extinct.
Okay.
And the jury's out. Tasmania is a big place. There's a lot of places that it could be hiding, and like um, maybe it's out there. I'm not going to sit here and act like I don't love the idea romantically that it is still out there
Mm-hmm.
because I do love that as an idea. Um,
Yeah.
and I love the idea of being the one to like get the photo, but that's like a different story entirely because ultimately what I realized pretty quickly over the past few years is like I'm not going to make it out to Tasmania soon, or at least like that's slowly becoming more of a reality as I like get more on top of my shit. But
Mm-hmm.
for a long time it was like, look, you can't just sit around waiting for the project to happen. Like you need to be making work like that. Like I think that for me personally, one of the most important things about being an artist is like finding consistency in the practice, even if you're not
Mm-hmm.
making exactly what you want to be making.
Mm-hmm.
So it started with that, and it was just kind of a prompt, and like in a kind of like lazy, lame way, I suppose you can kind of look at some of these images and sort of understand the idea of like I know what I saw, like a ton of birds or just like random things that I come upon. But like a year and a half ago, I almost cut my finger off, and then I sort of got thrown into the mix, got me starting to think about like broken things as well, and so
Mm.
now it was sort of like I know what I saw, but I'm also thinking about vision and like a change in perception because like now whenever I look down at my left hand, it's still my hand and it at this point like I recognize it as my own, but if I go and like watch videos or see photos of my hand from before the accident, I have this sort of like out of body experience
Yeah.
where I'm like, that's not me, but it is me, and it's like really peculiar. And so that's kind of gotten dragged into the project. But I think in a lot of ways, for now, I'm like at kind of the beginning of several projects, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And so what it's kind of becoming is just kind of an exploration of like where to go next, and really just trying to execute all of the different ideas I have. So like the third image is at St. Louis Art Museum. Um, and I went and I studied all of the instances that they could find me of Lazarus, the
Mm.
biblical figure that died and came back to life.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I'm not super religious, but what fascinated me about Lazarus was that his name has become sort of a way to describe animals that were thought to be extinct and were later rediscovered in the wild.
Mm.
And so there was this
Okay.
like direct connection between Lazarus and the tiger, but it was more like it was more thinking a little bit more heavily about just this phrase of like, I know what I saw. Like, I guess I don't know for sure that that phrase is in the Bible at this moment, but the story, like, I was raised Catholic, so I know about this stuff. I just don't necessarily care about it anymore. um, like, the story is that he was so faithful that the Lord chose to bring him back to life. And so there's all these people going to his crypt to sort of see him living again incredulously. And so there's this air of, I know what I saw, Lazarus is alive.
Yeah.
Um, and just like, I don't know, kind of mining that phrase for everything it's worth.
Yeah.
Um,
There's a lot to that. Um, Even just I mean, you probably have like a few different conceptions, a few different ways that that phrase has played out in your understanding.
yeah.
Um, and that's definitely not the the sensation I had when I first heard that phrase, but it's a really accessible phrase.
Yeah, but it's also really insidious. Like,
Mm.
the one of the things I'm also working on a new piece that it's only in concept at the moment, but it's going to be a video piece of like randomly playing short, like 3-ish second clips of people saying I know what I saw, and I'm mining these out
Mm.
of popular culture, movies, television shows, news outlets. I have a Google alert set up for the phrase, so I get an email every day where like of videos and articles where that phrase is getting used.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I say it's so insidious is because I really feel like that phrase on all at once suggests that from the user, I am saying this and it is a statement of fact. But to receive that phrase or hear it, it has nothing to do with fact or reality and everything to do with perception.
Mm.
And that discrepancy fascinates me. And it's sort of like please believe me. It doesn't, it's not about fact, it's about belief.
Yeah.
And that's something I think is really core to just like our culture at large right now, is that so much of what we think and do and believe and see and decide on has like everything to do with what feels right and nothing to do with what is actually right.
Mm. Especially when there isn't, you know, uh, that people are out and they know what they see. They see this, especially with the big C word, the COVID out there, uh, something that's invisible, right? And but has also had a profound visual effect on the way that we experience reality,
Yeah.
and how quickly um, it has become normal to anticipate the viewing of masks. I was in the grocery store the other day, and if somebody had shown me a photograph of what I was seeing, 6 months ago, I wouldn't have had any basis of understanding like what that reality is that we're living in. I'm connecting it to this idea of like there's this invisibility, and then that also has such a profound effect on the way that we're experiencing human connection, especially in public places. Um, yeah. That's where that led me.
Yeah, and what's kind of interesting about that is not only that, but if you had seen that photograph, like your perception of what that reality feels like would be so
Mm,
different. Like
hmm
you're at the grocery store. It's super banal. Like being there right now,
Yeah,
I think
it's
that's
chill.
kind of the sensation. But I don't know if you agree with this, but I think if I had seen that photo, several months ago, I would have I think there's a part of me that would have flippantly been like, well, what's the big deal? Like, what is going on? This is ridiculous. But then the other part of me, like the real core of me, like, oh shit, like something is really not right. And that is
Yeah,
factually true about now. But um, I think that
I
the
think it would have been.
anxiety is much like greater in the perception than the reality.
Yeah. I think I would have been very, very frightened
Yeah.
by that image. Um, Very like unsettled and surreal, and also very frightened.
Yeah.
Um, but I don't have a sense of fright. I mean, I more so have a sense of fright around now um, the viewing of people's faces whom are
Yeah.
unmasked. uh, and in the various and I think this is an experience that's taking place culturally. The experience of watching television series, any kind of like uh, flippant and non-necessary displays of physical affection,
Yeah.
kind of like make me cringe a little bit because I'm like a hugger. I'm a very huggy person. Um, but now when I see people hugging on The Sopranos, I am like I'm like disgusted by them.
You're like, what are you doing? It's a
Yeah,
pandemic.
so then the visual experience of actually being afraid of other people's mouths, and then they take on this like grotesque they're like I think of people's faces much more grotesquely now.
Yeah, no, totally.
I'm like, you're clean if you have a mask. It's like underwear or something.
Exactly.
Could you talk to me and our viewers a little bit about the format of these photographs? So you're taking these photographs also in large format?
Yeah, so these are all going to be large format 4x5 photographs. Admittedly, some of these are actually color images, but I just don't think that that's working for me.
Oh, I see.
So like a lot of the like this one in particular I shot in color, but I really hate the color version. Um,
I can imagine what those colors are.
yeah,
I can
they're
see.
kind of yellow and
Very young. Yeah.
very institutional and kind of grody. So yeah, I mean like and I think what's kind of emerging in my practice, despite the fact that all I'm showing you are photos, um,
hmm
is that like I have these other ideas for pieces that are in many ways not straight, so to speak, photographs.
hmm
Um, and like I think the big impasse I'm at right now is trying to figure out how they all live together, how they all like have a relationship.
Okay.
And I don't have an answer to be perfectly honest, but um, yeah, I'm like doing a couple things more than just like making photographs these days. But yeah, I mean, I love photography, and I think it's really hard for me to like walk away from it. And so in a lot of ways, I know that I'll continue to create work this way as well as anything else that I continue to choose to do.
Hmm.
So, but yeah, I mean, these are all kind of very consistent in terms of the way that they're created. They're shot on film. I scan them, and then I sort of create reproductions digitally using inkjet printing.
Cool.
So
Um, One of the things, not ever having any kind of formal education in photography, what do you find about the 4 by 5 shape? Is it the shape that draws you to shooting in that format, or is it something that has to do with just the mechanics of the types of cameras that produce these images?
I think it's a couple things. So, like, when I got to college, I had a 35 millimeter camera and I had what's called a bulk film loader, which allows you to reuse 35 millimeter film canisters. And it also allows you to buy film for like one third the price because you're buying it in bulk.
Oh,
And I had this vision of like, this is all I'm ever going to need for the rest of my life is because I'd fallen in love with film in high school, like late high school. I took some photo classes and like just
uh-huh.
basically slept in the dark room. And I was like, this is it. This is all I need. And then I took intermediate photo, and my professor and mentor does this thing in one of the first classes. He calls it the penny tour of the history of photography. And he just brings out like a huge smattering of cameras that are in his camera collection. And all at once, it went from 35 millimeter is film photography to actually film photography is really just a surface, and they make it in like 300 different sizes. And I
Mm.
was like, oh shit. And so I like played around with medium format a little bit. And then at some point I was like, I want to try 4 by 5. And my professor was like, okay. He taught me how. And I fell in love with it. And I think it's a couple things. For one, like this image in particular that we're looking at, you can zoom in, like if you had the full image and not just like a JPEG,
Hmm.
onto those drawings that are, or they're not drawings, they're screen prints. I
Okay,
forget of what variety, if I'm being honest. They're from a plate, but I don't remember beyond that.
I
Um,
see.
but you can zoom in on those and you can see every detail, every line, every little carve that the artist made to produce that print. And you can
Mm.
read the description and the information that's provided beneath it. And so like
Wow.
that that quality, that integrity down to such a small scale was like really exciting to me for a lot
Hmm.
of reasons. One of which being that you can print these images super large. And that's like, there's something really satisfying, especially if you're kind of like a photo geek, about big prints. You can put your
Yeah.
face on them and you can just see everything. And so that really excited me. And then the other part of it was it's a fundamentally different way of making photographs. So like when we make
Okay.
pictures with our phones or like a digital camera that like is handheld, there's sort of there's a dexterity and a quickness that you can adopt where the you can just very quickly make images. And with a 4 by
Yeah.
5 in most cases you have your tripod and you have to get out your camera and you have to unfold it and you put it on the tripod and you attach the lens and then you focus and you meter, and like it becomes more of a ritualistic type experience rather than
Mm.
what my professor would have called like a point and grunt type experience where you very quickly just like click and then you're on to the next thing. It's more like there's a level of you have to be kind of deliberate and
Yeah.
very like actively thinking about what images you're making, because oftentimes you're only carrying enough film to maybe make 10 images at any given time.
Mm. Well, that makes this first image in the bundle um, much more clear.
It's also much more depressing when you realize that like I know that there were about 10 times as many birds when I arrived, and by the time I got set up they had all flown away.
Yeah. Yeah, the act of you being there and observing the situation fundamentally changes it too,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, I mean, things change, and like that active viewing I think is a huge part of it, like me being able to sort of like arrive at something and sort of be like, okay, I want to make a photograph of that, and
Hmm.
living with that subject for a while,
Mm.
I think really makes you think a lot more sincerely and a lot more carefully about the edges of the image that you're producing and like really where things begin and end.
Yeah. Yeah, and I noticed that as we um move through some of these images. I love edge work. You
Yeah.
know, the the bookmark in the bottom center of
Mm-hmm.
this image just teetering over the edge of the table.
Yeah. And like,
And there are
go ahead.
these nature works. These I think these are like connected in some way. We have the fallen bridge here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Kind of that's what it looks like. And then this like fallen fence. And there's these interventions, these like man-made interventions that are like falling apart or are in some level of disrepair. But then like this image here stands out as uh, not necessarily, like a nature in disrepair, but nature be in disrepair? Something I think about a lot.
Yeah. And like I think a lot of these come out of, like I said, thinking about broken things because my finger is
Mm.
like crooked now and just kind of like jacked up.
Yeah.
And so like that really started to kind of emerge as this thing that felt really related to these other things I was thinking about was like,
Hmm.
a tree falls on this fence and then it just sort of lives like that for a while. Can I go and do something with that?
Hmm.
So,
That led me to earlier. I wanted to ask you this question. I'm going to ask you it now.
mhm.
You were talking about how a it's like an out of body experience for you to see photographs of yourself um, before you had the accident with your finger,
Yeah.
and you might have just answered it in some ways, but I was curious about like the out of body experience. Do you feel that just as like a strict physical thing? Like there's something different about your body that like you used to have this one thing and that was your body. And then in the future there's this other thing that's your body. But then there's also this question that I have that I want to posit to you in that when you look back at that person before that accident took place, if you also have that out of body experience because you know that you hadn't experienced that pain and hadn't experienced that trauma, and that experience like really changed you, um, like emotionally or spiritually in some ways.
Oh man. I feel like I feel like it's really hard to say. Like thinking about like who I was before, it was just sort of like I was this person who had human problems and human interests, and I like I think honestly what happened was like I now that I have this, it's like 90% of people that I encounter don't even ever notice it. It's relatively
Mm-hmm.
minor. It's there, but it's it depends. Um, but like I was actually telling my two friends this yesterday, and I end up talking to one of them about this kind of regularly because he's in medical school to become like a reconstructive plastic surgeon, so he can like help people with like cleft lips and things, and um,
Yeah.
because he wants to like help. He's not like he doesn't want to do like augmentation.
I see.
And so like we've talked a lot about my finger in that capacity, and what I told him was like there isn't a day that I don't think about it. And
Mm.
it's so hard to conceive of a world where like I didn't. And it was really interesting because my other friend who was there was like, I never think about my hands. And I was like, I don't think I did either. Like, why would you? I mean,
Right.
you don't necessarily need to look down at your hands and sort of be like, yep, all 10 are there.
Yeah.
It's like, it's just sort of this like inherent thing that's like innate to your human experience. It's like, I have
Hmm.
9 fingers or 10 fingers and 10 toes, and I don't need to question that. They're just like there. I can feel them and I know where they are, and like that's just sort of part of like human like motor autonomy or whatever.
Right. Yeah. It's like proprioception
Yeah.
of like knowing exactly where your body is in an unaffected way.
exactly. And so like I don't know that this really answers your question, but I think where I'm at now is just that like I'm really trying hard not to like fixate on it.
Mm,
And if I do, at the very least, like try and utilize that in some like meaningful way.
yeah,
Um,
which brings us to these images, and I want to say I appreciate you sharing that, because the life of an artist is affected by um, everything, everything that's going on. That's like an easy thing to say,
yeah,
but when we have these large changes in your life, for then you to be exploring these images of objects that are broken, um, or in some level of disrepair, really helps kind of clarify um, your exploration of these objects, knowing more so, which you've been experiencing with that physical trauma.
yeah, and like it's complicated because it doesn't like bother me. It doesn't make me sad. It's just sort of like this ever present thing. Like my finger, it doesn't look like it used to.
Yeah.
And so it's like really complicated because like it's frustrating to be so fixated on something that I find humorous at times and I don't necessarily
Mm.
like feel sad about. It doesn't really impede my ability to do anything. And so I don't feel
Hmm.
like it's this huge negative impact on my life and experience. It's just sort of like it's complicated as this thing that happened and now I'm like living with it. And yeah, I don't like I think a big part of it is just like reconciling that happened and that exists and that it's like it's a part of me now and it's inescapable. And I think in a lot of ways it really like thrust right in front of my eyes like my humanity.
Yeah.
um
Mm.
and like I don't know, it fucked me up for a little while just like dealing with the physical pain, but once that like went away, um I imagine to some extent it was coping, but I genuinely think that a big part of it is like I feel really comfortable laughing about it and kind of like you know make like trying to make my friends uncomfortable with it by like doing like salad finger like weird stuff. And like I wouldn't do it to a stranger because that would be kind of messed up, but
Yeah.
my friends that know me really well and I don't feel too weird about it, like I kind of like make a joke of it and stuff. And I think for me that's realistically the kind of relationship I want to have with things like this in my life.
Yeah.
And yeah, but it definitely had those moments where like all of the sudden I felt really human and like really vulnerable.
Oh,
Um,
I can imagine.
and it wasn't so much as like I'm gonna die. It was more just
Mm.
like it was simultaneously being like really um impressed by two different things. One being just like how incredibly fragile we are as like physical beings, but
Hmm.
also like how incredibly resilient we are as human beings. Like I took an eighth of an inch chunk out of my finger, except for like an eighth of an inch section that was just like barely holding the spine of my finger together, if you will. Like if you imagine my finger as a book, you know,
Yeah.
and they sewed it back together and it's like crooked now because it's like if you take a piece of paper and you cut a piece out of it and you try to take the two ends and like fold them together, like now you have this like bent trapezoid type shape.
Right.
um but like the fact that they stitched my finger together in a way that like genetically it is not intended to, and my body
Yeah.
just went, that's a finger. Send in the forces, we're gonna reconnect that baby. Like,
Yeah. Thanks, guys. We'll take it from here.
exactly. It's like,
Yeah.
how the hell does that work? Like, it doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, like no glue or some sort of like nanotube
Yeah,
nerve wire, something. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, that's incredible. It's like I like how you sandwiched those two kind of different facets of like the fragility of the body and then like the subtle intervention necessary for it to heal itself.
Yeah, it's like business as usual. Like the body's like, this the old guy who like works at the factory who
Uh-huh.
knows how to fix all the machines, and some like young guy comes along and he's like, the stamping machine is broken, and the old guy's like, yeah, that happens. Let's go take a look. And he just like slaps some duct tape on it or something, and just like magically it works again.
Yeah, he was like, "Well, here's your problem. This this uh this screw is one thread too tight."
Yeah, exactly. Or he's
Something that
like,
doesn't even make sense.
and then the young guy's like, well, don't you think it's gonna matter that like this bolt over here is missing? And the guy's like, that's been missing since 2019. It's not a big deal.
I have a couple more of the works that you shared with me that I'm interested in talking about.
Yeah.
Um, this one really stood out to me. Is kind of this like exploded object, but I don't have a read on what they feel connected to each other. These different aspects, but I don't know. I just felt really drawn to this work here.
This is so I have another photo I made from my previous project where um it's a 4x5, but I zoomed in really close on my leg, and
Mm.
I grabbed a bunch of my hairs and I pulled them up.
Mm-hmm.
And so I made like a little mountain on my leg. And
Oh.
um, it's kind of grotesque. I did a takeover for the New Yorker photo one time, and I posted it, and the reception was super mixed. Half of the people were
Okay.
like, "This is so rad," and then half of the people were like, "This is disgusting. Get it off of my feed." And I kind of think that this is probably one of those images as well. When people come to understand what it is that they're looking at.
Mm.
Um, this is the like this is all the dead skin and like slough that fell off of my finger as it was healing.
Mm.
that
I see.
was like in a lot of ways telling.
Yeah.
Also, go
It's
ahead.
like the concept's like a fine wine. It takes some getting used to.
Yeah.
But
But it was
that's
really
the same noise I
satisfying that
make.
you
It's
chose
the
to
same
call it
noise
an
I drink.
exploded view.
Oh yeah. Uh huh.
Because my finger did kind of explode.
Yeah.
Um,
Quite the collection you got here.
yeah, it's one of those things that like it's kind of gross to admit that I have chosen to keep. Um,
My little screen popped up here and just moved the trash.
you know, that's where that should be going. Um,
No, I'm fascinated by it.
yeah, I don't know. It was like this thing I did that like I felt was really gross, but it was also like I sort of had this vision of it as like being an artistic decision, like holding on to this. But also, like, I think that was an excuse just to sort of like do this weird kind of gross, creepy thing that I was doing, which was like when skin fell off of my finger, I was putting it in a bag.
Mm,
And the logic, for what it's worth, was like, this is the end of my finger as it was meant to be.
I see.
And by like holding on to this, I think to some extent I was trying to like hold on to that as an idea. Like I didn't want to let go or like accept the fact that my finger was permanently altered.
I see.
So yeah.
That makes sense. Um, One thing that I oh yeah, so and it sounds like you're kind of dancing around it as like was it this like compulsion that was taking place, and then this was a way to kind of like formalize that compulsion to collect these things? Or I mean, like sometimes there's just a sense of like I should collect this and I should keep it for later because it's probably gonna work for me in one of the ways. Like if it wasn't a photo series, it would be a baggie that you shook in front of your friends' faces to freak them out, and then kind of like a similar sense as to what you were speaking about earlier, right?
Yeah.
Like there's kind of like a value in these things, but I wonder how did you have it all planned out as it was going on, or is it something that just occurred naturally?
I don't think I like I really don't know that I might sneeze. Okay, nope, it's gone.
Mm.
Um I think when I started doing it, this is one where like journaling or something would be really useful because I could just be like, I thought this. Um,
Yeah. Hmm.
but I think it was more just sort of like this thing that I chose to do, and I didn't
Mm.
necessarily think like this is what I need to do right now. I think it was more like I have this weird. So I honestly, actually, now that I'm thinking about it more, I think what it came back to was I was keeping like the splints and things like that.
Okay.
And an image I didn't share with you for this is a photo I made of one of the first splints that I had holding my finger together. And
Mm.
this is kind of gross, but like my finger was still like leaking and bleeding, even though it was like sewn back together. And so it's this picture of a splint, and there's this imprint of my finger on a patch of dried blood. Um, and you can see my fingerprint in like the
Mm.
negative, so to speak.
Yeah.
And in holding on to like those things, and I was also holding on to all the documentation, and that was more like, like an adult thing to do. Like I need to keep these documents.
Right.
Um, I think I just sort of like reflexively thought, okay, um, I should hold on to this skin that's falling off. I mean, why not?
Yeah. Yeah, it's evidence in the way that those other things were evidence.
Yes, I love that word. That's a really great way to put that. Like I think that I saw it in a lot of ways as like evidence of something that had occurred.
Mm.
And it's the same reason why like I like when I was sitting at the hospital bed, and I will spare you these images because they're super grotesque. I like had my partner take pictures of me sitting there, and I had her take pictures of my finger, and like take pictures while they were stitching it back together. And it felt like this thing that needed to be done. Like as a person who makes and collects images, I almost like needed that visual content to go back to.
Yeah.
So I think it comes from that. Like kind of, I think as a photographer, your practice is a lot about collecting,
Mm. Okay.
oftentimes. And I think maybe that just like that combined with an amount of uncertainty about what my finger was going to look like, I think kind of led me to this like I need to hold on to these things, um, because they're somehow useful or important. I don't know.
I think that this is useful. I was just so drawn to this image. I didn't zoom in. I think it might have become more clear as I zoomed in and started to see the fidelity of things. But
Yeah.
it's kind of like like feathers or like small rocks or bits of charcoal. Like it's something that I'd be like interested in drawing in charcoal. Is like what it reaches where it reaches me.
Yeah.
It has this like really like drawn quality to it, and it looks like you placed these bits. That's the way to say it, on top of like a piece of glass, and then on
Precisely.
top of a board, something very white.
Yep.
But then it also looks like almost as if you put them inside of a scanning bed,
Oh yeah.
um, similar to like a scanning process as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, that would if any really good graphite artists are out there and want to stare at Drew's finger bits for a period of time, this would be a great drawing as
Yeah.
well.
I do. That's kind of interesting. It does kind of have like a still life drawn quality to it because of like the
Mm,
quality of the light and stuff.
yeah.
Yeah.
Related to that, I think we have a couple other photographs here. So is this your finger?
Yes.
Okay.
and that's an angle that doesn't do a lot to sort of make you think that there's a lot wrong with the finger, and there really isn't, quite frankly. Like
Right.
I
Because I thought
should
this was like someone else's finger, and it just didn't have any reason to be in this photo set.
no. I mean, so it's technically the pointer finger, so like the right finger in the image.
Hmm.
And like I don't know, it's hard to tell. I mean, I look at it and I understand how it's a little bit off because it's
Right.
my finger.
Yeah, it does make sense. Yeah.
But basically, like the way it got stitched back on, it's like a little bit crooked and a little bit twisted.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, there's some different tensions there.
yeah, but like this image, for me, like I was thinking about, again, back to this phrase of I know what I saw, and like kind of
Mm.
thinking about that as a broader prompt, thinking more just generally about like seeing and like the ways that vision are utilized in different ways. And so I don't remember how I arrived at the thought, but I was sort of like, again, thinking about my hands, thinking about broken things, also thinking about this phrase, I know what I saw. And it kind of like occurred to me that like maybe there's something interesting about like ASL, sign language, in relation to these things. Or it's like, in some ways, maybe it's the meeting of these two ideas. And
Mm.
so what this is it's sort of like, if I'm understanding correctly, the to say see or sight in ASL, you sort of like make that hand signal
Oh,
and you
okay.
kind of like you sort of swipe it forward, I think. Don't quote me on it. Like I did my research and I was like,
Yeah.
I'm like 95% sure I'm doing this right.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
and so like for me it was sort of this way of like thinking about my finger in relation to vision and like understanding,
Hmm.
um and like maybe trying to kind of like rope in all of these like very disparate ideas into one image that can kind of like tie a bow onto all of them or something.
Hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, I mean, even language, like
Yeah.
the language part comes up with that as well, somewhat obviously, but uh, it it leads me to think about something unrelated to what we're talking about, though, but using the hands as methods of communication, which is what you do. Like
Yeah.
that's your like point and click finger, maybe.
It's the opposite
Like,
one, but yeah, I mean, um to your point, to kind of like run away with that, like I talk with my hands a lot, especially
uh-huh.
like in person. And so I think actually now that you say that, I think that's part of what led me to this idea was like thinking about gestures. And I think also I was like in my kitchen at the time and I have this book. It's sort of like a cheeky little book that's about like how to say things in Italy with your hands, because
Okay. Yeah.
Italians gesticulate a lot.
You needed that before your residency.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I,
Required reading.
yeah, it's such a good book. Like, especially after you've lived in Italy for a while, you sort of look back at that book and you're like, this is so accurate. Like,
Yeah.
I'm like driving with my Italian roommate and she's taking us to the residency. Like, somebody's in her way and she's like, Madonna dai. Like, a lot of this and just like, just hands all the time.
But there are codes to it,
Yes.
is what you're saying. So like it's funny to think about, like like Italian hand gestures for Italy, of like, you don't need those to have those conversations. But if you notice, and there are structures and systems and codes,
Yeah.
like doing this in the wrong situation would like conflate the thing that's being communicated, or it would hint at something else that's going on,
Yeah.
which I find really fascinating.
Yeah. Absolutely.
uh, there's a book that I'm really interested in, the King Killer Chronicles. It's a fantasy book. The author is Peter Rothus, and the first book is called The Name of the Wind. The second book is called A Wise Man's Fear,
Mm-hmm.
and the third book's coming out this year after like 11 years of being written. Um, but there's a group of individuals inside of this fantasy world that they actually only emote through their hands. They
Oh.
speak, but they use their hands as the ways that they determine emotion
Mm-hmm.
because um, they think that showing emotion on your face is uncivilized. Uh, and so they look at the other part of the developed world as very uncultured and very uncivilized because they allow their emotions to control them through their face,
Huh.
right? So they take their emotions and they focus it into different hand signs, different kind of like mudras,
Mm-hmm.
um, which I think is somewhat relevant and thinking about kind of like formalizing emotion through the hand or formalizing language through the hand, which I think is a less visceral experience than having it like come out of your mouth.
Yeah.
These words.
Yeah. There's like a, I don't know if tact is the right word, but there's an amount of kind of I don't know. It feels a little more deliberate, but I think I
Mm,
do genuinely wonder to what extent like I feel that way because it's not the way that I typically communicate.
mm,
But I do think like to sort of like rope in photography into this.
please
I
do.
think there is a lot of validity to that, and because like um, this is something that gets talked about sometimes. Like different kinds of cameras produce a different kind of relationship to like if you're photographing people to the subject. So like, if I have like a regular camera and I'm holding it up to me and I kind of like lean forward, to like look through
Mm,
and look at you and take your photo. There's sort of this like aggression to it. Whereas
mm,
if I'm using like a twin lens camera where you look down into it, it's a little more introspective or something where it's less like I'm taking something from you and more like I'm making something in front of you.
mm.
And then like a 4x5, you put it on the tripod and it's so static. And then like you use like a jacket or a dark cloth to actually look at the back of the camera to compose your image. It produces this completely different reaction from the subject. Like the ways
Yeah.
that people think about and sort of encounter these different things is just like makes them feel very differently about what's happening in some ways.
Yeah. The image that came to me brightly um, was like the Undertaker's hood at the gallows when you talked about the large like
Yeah.
cloak. There's like this anonymity that is even maybe in some ways more expressed through like you're hiding yourself
Yeah.
and going through this act of like veiling yourself. Um, and I do also think that there are the way so I'm like I speak about photography as a layman,
Mm-hmm.
um, and I've noticed in conversation with you today that there seems to be not even seems to be that you have very deliberate language around the act of like making a photograph,
Mm-hmm.
um, whereas I think in common like nomenclature, we call it like taking a picture or like taking a photograph. But the only time you've used the word taking in regards to photography was just then to express that like single lens, point and shoot or DSLR act of like taking an image from someone
Yeah.
or like instead of like making something of them or making something in front of them.
Yeah. I am actually like pretty deliberate about that. And I think it kind of varies. Sometimes I say making a photograph because I want to feel um a little bit more highbrow. But I do think a big part of it is like the that language, like all language is like really critical to the way and like the results produced with what you're trying to say. Like taking a photograph and making a photograph are in some senses at their core the same concepts. Like you understand that the person is capturing an image and it's
Mm-hmm.
going into the camera. But like I think that it's, for me, I feel like it's kind of important to make that distinction because um, it is more of like a capture or a make, because I'm not taking anything per se. Like, at least it doesn't feel that way. It's more sort of like the rendering of an idea to make it even more
Mm.
annoyingly highbrow.
Keep going.
It's like, okay, I have this idea for this photograph of my hand, or for this loop, and I'm not taking the idea. Like,
Hmm.
um I'm either making it, or I'm just like capturing it. And that capture is less of like a, it's mine now, and more of like
Hmm.
a, it's recorded now.
Yeah.
Like, one of my favorite quotes from an artist is, it's from this interview with Walid Beshti. And um, I'm going to pull it up because it's so wonderful. Basically, the journalist or the interviewer is going to Walid, um, and says, "You walked into a gallery and saw your work, thinking it had been made by someone else. What would your first reaction be?" And he's trying to get Walid Beshti to consider the possibility that somebody got the idea before him.
Hmm.
And I've like always loved what he said. He says, "I don't know, probably that I should stop making that work. I think it would be a nice feeling since I'd be freed up to do something else. But maybe that's not what
Mm.
you're asking." And he says, "An assistant I had while I was teaching at the School of the Art Institute told me that there were a handful of people who had started making folded paper photograms after I gave a talk there, which is something that Walid Beshti has done." And the assistant teaching seemed annoyed. And Walid says, "I think he expected me to be annoyed by it as well, but I found it exciting that someone had borrowed something from my work. It meant that there was something
Mm.
to it that was worth borrowing and could be put to someone's use. I mean, once you make something and put it out into the world, it isn't really yours anymore. It's part of a larger conversation, and the best case scenario would be that it would be expanded upon, applied to other circumstances or thought processes." And
Mm.
I love that so much, because I think
Hmm.
that for me is like at its core part of why I would say making a photograph and not taking a photograph. Because like I'm not taking anything. I'm if anything, like, the act of photography is like giving something.
Yeah.
Um
Yeah, I can attempt to be even more strange and pretentious than you think you were being right now. And in my world, it's this act of opening up.
yeah.
Um, and that's like functional and engineering, and it's opening yourself up, that's looking. And then, the camera. It's not a capturing, it's an allowing. It's like an opening, for that particular light to enter into the body.
Yeah, absolutely.
Uh,
Yeah.
so so we can be these strange, pretentious guys all day. But I think it's really valuable, though. I think it's so valuable what you're saying, um, because I've been in situations where photography has felt like, um, capture.
Mhm.
I think that's something that is, being confronted in contemporary photography. Is are what are the ethics behind the making of these images? Are they captured images, or are these, consensual and done like with openness?
Yeah. And I think one place where that's like really kind of coming to foot, and I think people have slowly been abandoning their post as like the artist. And that's one of the things I love most about that quote is, this very succinct little statement of, once you put something out into the world, it isn't yours anymore. Like, I
Hmm.
love that, because like for me, it's such a relief. Like, I don't have to be beholden to these ideas on a really like hardcore scale anymore. Like,
Yeah.
they existed before me, and they will exist after me, and I'm just sort of borrowing them for the moment.
Mm.
And like, I think a great place where you see this kind of abandonment and like really attempt to sort of address the like collaborative quality of image making is with Paul Sepoya, who like last year had a show at the Contemporary Art Museum here in St. Louis,
Mm-hmm.
and he makes these like really incredible images in his studio with mirrors and curtains where it's really hard to tell where the image kind of like begins and ends because like
Mm.
he's just so good at playing with the seams and the surfaces and the edges of mirrors and things. And he's often almost always photographing himself with lovers and friends, and so there are these like these bodies and appendages kind of coming all over around the images. And he was actually in the previous Whitney biennial, and it didn't say Paul Sepoya on the wall. It said Paul Sepoya and then, 12 more names of all of his collaborators. Because what he
Mm.
says in lectures is, there are the photographs I make when we do these studio visits, but there's also the photographs that my lovers and colleagues make because we're all artists.
Mm-hmm.
And so like him addressing that collaborative quality and really rejecting the notion that he was the sole creator, I think is like really powerful and really interesting. And it's something that I think like the art world is working towards addressing and really acknowledging and accepting more and more and more and more and more as we, progress further along.
Mm.
And I think that's like
Yeah,
super cool.
I think it is super cool. I think it in some ways there needs to be um, certain valves. I think that the way that we understand art and art making, a lot of the uh, a lot of the negativity, a lot of the trauma in contemporary art, a lot of kind of this like classic artist problem um, that has been loved over and over again by contemporary media is this sense of like the tortured artist,
Yeah.
uh, and that comes from a sense of responsibility outside of the bounds of what a human um, is actually capable of in some ways, and uh, like knocking down the monolith of the artist is in some places there, you know, I think it's important to knock down the monolith.
Yeah.
Maybe somebody like Paul Sepoya is building other monuments to artists, or removing bricks that aren't structural, or maybe taking some bricks that are structural and placing them on this other pile that we're creating.
Yeah.
But creating that opportunity to reduce some of um, the frankly like violent energy of like dedication, or in some ways it presents as like honor and legacy, like presupposition that the artist has this mythical power.
Yeah.
uh, I think it's valuable for us to expand our own experiences of what we're capable of as artists, to get into places that are meaningful, to communicate with other people. Um, but like you said, like you aren't the sole. You're not, if you're the only person carrying this, uh, you know, tonnage on your back, it's gonna do things to you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, like to kind of take that to like a more sort of lower level, for lack of a better phrasing, place. I've lost what I was going to
Huh?
say.
Yeah. Yeah, up in the clouds. um, but but then maybe this image that we're looking at here, I think also is something that we wanted to talk about as far as perspective and magnifying and changing light. I think this talks a bit about maybe some of the ways that these glass objects manipulate light, and the ways that you can reflexively, like this is like this work here is kind of like a photographic study of an ecosystem. um, Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it has a lot to do with all of that, and in a lot of ways, I see it as being super related to, like the picture of my hand, because it's a loop, it's an apparatus that helps you see,
Hmm.
and so it's related in that way. But in a lot of ways, like I really just wanted to make this photo because this is the loop I used for 6+ years, and I am like one of my favorite um well, I'll save that for later because I know you're going to ask me about it. But I think that I'm incredibly romantic and sentimental in a lot of ways, and in other ways, not at all. But like one of them, I think, is in photography. Like I have sort of a romantic relationship with like how I approach photography, right? Like,
Mm.
and I think that kind of emerges with things like photographing my dead skin. Like, I feel sentimental about my finger that I don't have anymore. Like I have this new different finger. And the
Mm.
loop like totally fits into that same criteria as like this object that I used to produce work that has gone on to be exhibited around the world, and it's now published as a photo book, and all of these things that were like these huge goals and these huge milestones that like I'm just absolutely over the moon that I have had the opportunity to produce and experience and go through. And like all along the way there was just this like little object that kind of hung out in the background and didn't really like ever get any notice, um,
Hmm.
but it like absolutely was critical to my practice. And
Yeah.
um, when it broke I was just like super bummed, and I felt like I needed to somehow memorialize the object in a way that I could like bring it with me into the future, even if the object has sort of lost its functionality.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, and um, what it reminds me of is just like materiality. So the that little guy was like never supposed to last forever.
Yeah.
Um, maybe there are objects like that that do last forever. Uh, and then there's a different relationship that can take place of like if that loop outlives you. Um, but like this one uh didn't
No.
definitely didn't outlive you. um I'm curious, you just said earlier you were going to speak about something, one of your favorite somethings that
Yeah.
I was going to ask you later, but I don't know what what question it is that I'm supposed to ask you at some point. So it seemed like it was relevant to you, so I'd be curious to hear what you were referencing.
I think it's one of the like last 10 questions you ask, but I'll tell you
Oh.
anyways.
Oh yeah, tell me.
So one of my favorite descriptions that someone has ever given me of my work is they
Uh-huh.
said that the way that I approached like imaging things and like thinking about photography and the things that I photograph and the projects that emerge from those photographs is they described my practice as gleefully antiseptic.
Oh.
And I mean, the idea I think is to some extent there, but to kind of elaborate, um, I have this very clinical approach to image making. I like to clean things up a lot.
Mhm.
And I think you can kind of see that even just in this small selection of images. Like it's there is sort of in a lot of cases a clear sense of where the edge of the image should be, and that I've sort of limited the number of things available inside of the image in an effort to keep a cleaner, more sort of clinical aesthetic. But at the same
Mhm.
time, like when I give lectures and when I talk about my work, I get like really excited, and I have this sort of energy of like, isn't this amazing? And in some ways like that's a little bit at odds at with the way that my images look.
Yeah.
And so like it felt like this sort of ultimate compliment, like to call me both at the same time antiseptic but also like filled with glee. And I was like, yes, that feels so accurate, and like I want to like embody that and hold on to that.
Yeah. Well, they're not. they're not opposite.
Yeah.
They're not mutually exclusive ideas. But I don't think I knew that until hearing those things together. I think that's great. Like a happy, like what is a happy heart surgeon?
Yeah.
Um, like I'd prefer my heart surgeon be happy, but like it's kind of strange to think of wanting them to be professional and wanting them to be obviously very clean, very clinical, to be precise, but then like I'd also hope that he's a happy guy, a happy girl, like whoever this person is, that would be uh, increasingly positive experience if they also were a happy person,
Yeah.
not just technically sound.
Yeah. Like you want to go into a doctor's office that's like both clinical but also filled with energy.
Yeah, yeah, that good stuff.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, I guess we are kind of getting towards the tail end. I'm going to drop a link for some of Drew's different um, social media pages, website. You also stream on Twitch, which I think is great, obviously.
I do.
So there's some links there. Pop the travel agency links in. Um, but yeah, maybe we won't do all 10 questions today. But I just want to. I think that one is a really important one, because it giving people a sense of um, what you remember as responses to the work, or I think that also helps us as artists and us as viewers to consider the methods in which that we can interact with artists' work in a way that feels supportive,
Yeah.
which isn't always like cut and dry. I think we get kind of bogged down. I know I get bogged down in hearing the same kind of like truncated responses, the same like very common responses to the work that on the surface are compliments, but what they really do is expose to me, you at worst, expose to me the viewer's disinterest
Yeah.
in what's actually taking place. Um, so most clearly, I think that care is really necessary in responding to the works that artists put out. Um, and that's not to make people feel um, anxious in any way about responding to work, but I think it's always so memorable when individuals you can get a sense that they were paying attention to you, that you were seen, that
Yeah.
this like gleeful antiseptic quality of your work was put into words, and words that maybe you most likely you would have never come up with on your own.
No. Yeah. Yeah. I don't think I would have ever gotten there. But like I think that maybe like if I was prompted and kind of like guided along, I could arrive at an idea that feels similar, like sort of,
Hmm.
oh, your work is reminds me of this work. And I could be like, yeah, because like that work excites me for these reasons and da 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 da. And you could, go on and on along this
Hmm.
path and think about it this way. But I don't know that I would ever arrive at that exact phrase or even like something that's close enough to feel exactly the same.
Mm.
I think that's like, yeah.
So then from there, I want to encourage you to tell me and tell other people what the best ways are for them to support your work and in the where it is right now.
I think right now, I mean, you'd be doing me a big favor if you followed me on Twitch. I'm a little baby. I got
Yeah.
a whole 2-3 followers, 23 that is. And then just, you can follow me on Instagram and like and comment, tell me what you think when I post stuff. If you're like super into what's going on, um, you can support me on Patreon, and I do monthly studio visits, and I sort of talk my way through the decisions I'm making and the work I'm doing, which is, you know, a lot more multifaceted than like just photographs like this thing
We didn't
that's
even scratch the surface
yeah,
today.
yeah. I mean, I have like pieces in my studio that are behind me, hung on the wall, that are like these like tapestries. And if you're curious about that, I posted about it on Instagram recently.
I love those. I like desperately wanted to talk about them, but we have so much more that we can talk about in the future.
Yeah,
But I just wanted you to know that I love those.
thank you. I'm still like on the fence about them. Like I can't decide if they're cool or tacky.
Mm,
Um, but I think,
that's the good stuff.
you know, I mean, that's sort of being an artist in some capacity, is just like not being
Hmm.
super sure what's working yet. Um, but that's also, I digress, but that's also in part because I've only made like one and maybe almost two pieces, two tapestries. So it's like, how can you really have a sense of what's going on if you've only almost made two?
Mm.
But yeah, I mean, that's the main way. Just, you know, check out what I'm doing on the internets.
Yeah, it costs you nothing to follow somebody on Twitch. I popped a little shout out there in the stream, so if people are there, they can drop some follows.
Hell yeah.
And yeah, just that interaction, um, I think is really powerful. Something we come back to here on Art Brunch is you know, opening yourself up and being. I think the phrase that we've whittled it down to is being a nerd for your friends
Yeah.
on social media is what we kind of keep coming back to. If you're sensing like a sensation of anxiety or fear around reaching out or commenting on somebody's photo, you're probably doing the right thing,
Yeah.
and at some point it'll go away.
Yeah, and I like to kind of elaborate on that. Like, I'm a firm believer that there are no wrong answers, like in critique in particular. And I
Hmm.
think we can sort of expand critique to basically be any space where you're looking at something with another person and talking about it.
Hmm.
You know, and that's something that I've worked really hard to like um, deinstitutionalize my like two best friends with, because one's a computer scientist and one's in medical school. Like they in when we first started down this path of me, like, you know, I'm an artist and da 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 da, and they would sort of like hesitate, and like the more they spent time around me and the more I kind of like talked to them and sort of walked them through, you know, like how to look at art and how to think about art, and they realized that like, oh, and I was actually talking to my good friend about this yesterday. You know, it's really just has more to do with careful looking and saying how you think, what you think. There's not a wrong answer. Like my friend can be like, I don't like this piece, and here's why. And there's no world where that is a right or a wrong answer.
Hmm.
It's more just like, you know, deconstructing what's in front of you, carefully looking, and sort of, you know, it can literally be as simple as like, well, I see that this is made out of plastic and
Hmm.
it is red, and like you have entered into critique, like we're
Yeah.
here.
And all of those things are important. Like
Yeah,
it being made out of plastic, if that's as far as you get, there's so many connotations. There's so many reasons why and why not something would be made out of plastic.
yeah, yeah. Once you sort of like train yourself to be able to question a decision, you officially entered into a meaningful critique. Why does it matter that this is plastic? Well, it's a plastic sculpture, you know, and you just like you go along, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh my god, I feel like I kind of understand why this person might have made this out of plastic.
Hmm. Or you don't, and that's a critique in itself.
Yeah, and then you can be like, this artist kind of sucks, because it seems like maybe they didn't think about this as a decision actively in their practice.
Right. Yeah, and that's where it gets into I think that careful looking something that I consider a lot is the methods that we're taught to understand art comes from a standard of appreciation, and it's easy to appreciate Caravaggio. Uh, Like you can go there and you can appreciate the the painting, and we know that we're supposed to appreciate it. And actually, it's really terrible at cultivating curiosity or allowing you to carefully look, because it's the painting is so well taken care of that you can't even enter. You can't really even enter into the painting.
Yeah.
But there's so much work, so much very very beautiful work that allows you into it. And I think there's definitely a whole genre of contemporary art that is all about the viewer now, and all about cultivating that curiosity and cultivating that ability to carefully look. And if you're in a contemporary art museum and your careful looking doesn't get you anywhere, then something else is going on to consider.
Yeah. And this is maybe like kind of an interesting hot take to temper this idea that there are no right or wrong ideas in terms of like critique and thinking about work.
Mm.
To some extent, I do kind of believe that art is objective and not subjective,
Mm.
which is like very much at odds of this concept of there being no right answers.
Mm.
It's like this work is objectively this, and like, okay, but how do I reconcile that with the idea that there are no right or wrong answers? And I don't know, you can grill me about that on my Twitch later today, I guess.
Yeah. Are you streaming today?
I think I'll probably stream tonight. Yeah.
Cool. What are you gonna be streaming?
Well, I think the main event is gonna be I'm gonna play this game called Inside.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Because it looks
Familiar.
really beautiful. And just like hang out.
Nice.
So, but yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. Like a big reason why I started streaming was one, because I've been on Twitch for years and I love video games, and so like the prospect of streaming made me feel like it felt like an excuse to play games.
Mm.
And if I can sort of like somehow do it in a meaningful way, that's even better.
Mm.
And I realized like a couple weeks ago that like I had all of the equipment I needed anyways for the most part, just because like being a photographer and like producing videos in the past, and like I'm working on producing more, like I was like, I already have everything. Like, why am I not doing this already? Like, this is something that I've always wanted and loved the idea of. So there's that. But the other big part of
Mm.
it is like, um, I like the idea of there being this sort of pathway to me in terms of accessibility. So like if somebody comes in who like knows about the fact that I build cameras, they can come in and be like, hey, what's the deal? Like, can I ask you about this? And like, yes, you can. And I will talk to you about it while I play this game. Or
Nice.
like, hey, I have this question about a piece you made. And I'd be like, yeah, let me pull it up. Let's talk about it. Like,
Yeah.
I kind of like you're doing here on like on a broader scale with like a large group of artists. I like the idea that I can sort of exercise a space where I can, have my interests and do these activities and hang out with people and like give them an opportunity to share in those interests, but also on more of like an art surface or art level, we can have that same kind of engagement and conversation and openness where people can sort of be like, hey, this photo you made, I think it sucks and here's why. And like be like, all right, let's talk about it. Yeah, like I want to know why you
Yeah.
hate my pictures.
Yeah. So for all of you that hate Drew, definitely go follow go follow him on Twitch, and give him hell later
Yeah,
today.
question all of my decisions.
Cool. Well, I think that's a fun and interesting place to end the conversation. I really appreciate you being here today, and I look forward to doing this again with you in the future.
Yeah.
Because I think you got a really a great perspective that I still want to definitely glean and learn and grow from. So we'll definitely link that up, and if you enjoyed the show today, if you've been watching and you want to see more of this, just give us a follow. It's really helpful. Even if you don't like it and you're just feeling generous, follow us and then turn off your notifications. It's fine.
Damn.
It's helpful. And other than that, we have links all over the place. I'll pop Drew's links back into the chat one more time definitely go give him a follow. And on the various spaces, a lot of cool stuff going on there. So Drew, thank you for spending your time with me today.
Yeah, thank you. It's been super fun.
All right, we'll see you all later.